In other words, the knowledge of the hands and the feet, the knowledge of the knowing through doing, is not important. It cannot be any part of our salvation. And the early church rightly said, this is heresy. Jesus was fully, completely human, which means he really did engage real people, talk with real people. He ate, he expelled, he slept, he sweated, he suffered, he died. And the Docetists then and now say, well, none of that really counted. None of that is really important if it happened at all. What is really important is the divine magical communication. Today, those who say human beings didn't write the book, God wrote the book, want to bypass the human equation. They just want to bypass it. Right around. If incarnational theology affirms fully human, fully divine, then we would have to say the same thing about the revelatory tradition, fully human, fully divine. And that's orthodoxy. That's what our tradition says. But there are some people who want to keep cutting out the fully human because they're embarrassed about it, or because it's too ambiguous, or because it doesn't fit the magical kinds of incantations. But the real reason why people want to get around the human is because they do not want to have a religion of practice. They only want to have a religion of theory. That is, what you know saves you, not what you do. Because what you do is all about what you do in your body and all the struggles for that and the difficulties of that and the ambiguities of that, eh? The problem with that, you see, is that at the core of our tradition as Christians is a story that invites people to follow a way of being and doing. That's the discipleship tradition. And if you pull the thread of the discipleship tradition out of the New Testament, the whole thing will unravel. You just have nothing left. You have nothing left. Not a little bit of interesting stuff. You'll have nothing left if you pull the discipleship strand. The whole thing will unravel. And that's indeed what is happening, in my opinion, on both the liberal left, if you will, and the fundamentalist right. What is happening is the discipleship thread has been pulled and the whole tradition is unraveling into a docetic shell of Christianity that gets along famously with the culture of neighbors and commercial advertisements and the 6 o'clock news, because it's not concerned about the way people are in the world. It's only concerned about the attitudes of hearts and heads. On the other hand, you've got people who don't need to pull the thread to unravel it because they've closed the book and handed it over to the people who are pulling the threads. Is there another way? Is there a way to move beyond those who have closed the book because it's an artifact and those who have unraveled the heart of the book because they are docetic? Is there a way to deal with the real issues of making the story relevant and of overcoming the alienation and empowering our people to read the stories that we believe give us life and lead us towards salvation? I think there is, and I think it's right in front of our eyes. And that is, read the story. And read the story carefully and pay as much attention to these stories as we pay to Big Brother. And learn some tools to understand how these stories work. These are not arcane, mysterious theological codes that you need degrees to decipher. good to study theology, but you do not need a magical decoder ring that you get after so many years to decode these mysterious texts. These stories are stories by regular people, about regular people, for regular people. We must recover that. Rather than debating all these amazingly abstract theories about inspiration or lack of inspiration, or how the texts were produced and put together and edited, and that's all the liberal stuff, or how they're magically incanted and divinely dictated, and how they can be ingested like magical powder, that's the conservative side. Rather than all these theories about Scripture, maybe we should just recover a very traditional notion that we are a people of story. These are our stories. We gather as a people around these stories time and time again because we believe that the more we read these stories, the more chance there will be of these stories reading us. That is, these stories transforming us as we spend time with them, as we take them seriously, as we imagine them and reimagine them, as we not simply spectate, but as we become actors who are carrying on the story. Let me give you an example. When Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days, remember that story? What old story is Jesus reenacting? He is in some sense reenacting an old story. Is that an important old story if you are an Israelite? It is the old story. It is the story of my origins. It is at the core of my identity. I am a part of God's people because I am on a journey that God leads. Remember, God led Exodus Israel out of slavery from Egypt. That's what makes me me, is to be on that journey. And Mark's gospel begins with the announcement, the way is reopening through the wilderness, and a messenger appears heralding the reopening of a way in the wilderness, not just any way, but the old way, that fundamental, primal, original journey of the people. And Jesus then goes deeper into that wilderness for 40 days to be tempted, just like who were tempted in the wilderness? Israel. Now, the reason I say that is that what Jesus is doing is he is trying to convince us that the Exodus story is not over. You see, the Exodus story is not just something to deal with as an artifact on the one hand, or as a magical text to think about on the other hand, liberal, conservative, but as a story to be reenacted in our own lives, because that story is what convinces us to risk the journey to freedom, the journey to God, the journey to salvation. And so Jesus retells the story, but the important thing is he retells it in his own context. He re-narrates that story. And then later on, the evangelist comes along and re-narrates the story of Jesus, re-narrating the story of Israel. And later on, the church re-narrates the story of the evangelist, re-narrating the story of the Messiah, re-narrating the story of Israel. In other words, all we have in the church are people telling stories that have been told before, but that need to keep being told because our life depends on it. Because if not these stories, then what stories? Neighbors, deodorant that improves my love life, 6 o'clock news.